we took a look at some of the activity centers and animated storybooks released by Disney Interactive in the mid-90s that helped introduce so many kids to the world of computers. And today we're going to finish up our little retrospective by taking a look at some of their dedicated educational titles. But before we dive right into all the learning and fun of edutainment, let's start with a little Disney history lesson. In my last video, I briefly mentioned how Disney wanted to expand their media empire into the gaming market, and saw an avenue to do so through educational computer games. This maybe was true, but it actually happened several years before any of the games I'm talking about today. In the late 80s, game development was seen as very risky, but very rewarding. It seemed dangerous because nobody knew exactly what it was or how it worked, but if you did it right, you could make a ton of money. Disney saw the money-making potential of this brave new world and wanted in, and being the company of visionaries that it is, it wasn't down with just licensing its properties to any old development company like all the other movie-based crap out there. They've always been a more image-focused company than most, tightly controlling their brands as a way to maintain their grip on the family market. Disney's big problem back then was how quickly they needed to turn out games to coincide with film releases, and they struggled to find any developers who could deliver fast enough, but could also create games worthy of the Disney name. So instead of selling the licenses to outside companies, Disney instead absorbed small development studios and had their own animators work on art for the games. This way, Disney could control the product much more tightly without too much risk. And this strategy served them well at first, spawning successful titles like Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and after a $10 million licensing deal from IBM, the profitability of vertically integrating their game development seemed too great to ignore. Jeffrey Katzenberg himself got involved when Disney made the Aladdin game on Sega Genesis with Virgin Interactive in 1992, and when that proved to be highly successful, Disney reformed the Walt Disney Creative Studios branch as Disney Interactive, which was split into two divisions, Disney Interactive Entertainment and Disney Interactive Edutainment, and all of its development was moved in-house. While the first branch created your activity centers and animated storybooks, this second branch is responsible for the games we'll be looking at today, with the Disney Learning series of games. These are meant to teach little kids things like the alphabet and basic math, and the age ranges and difficulty of the games varied by title, with some meant for toddlers and others meant for elementary school kids. There were a good dozen or so of these released starting in 1997, but again, I'm just going to show you the ones that I grew up with and remember the most fondly. Let's start with Ready to Read with Pooh. This one is aimed super young, for ages 3 to 6, so I'm not expecting much of a challenge. Not to sound cocky or anything, but I'm pretty confident in my ABCs by now. Okay, so if you caught part 1 of this Disney Interactive retrospective, you might remember that I was very easily scared of a lot of these games as a kid. I thought I was just a scaredy cat, but apparently that was more common than I thought, because this game starts with Pooh singing a song about how safe you are.
Anywhere we please, holding you tight as I can. You're safe as a honeypot, you always will be, and I'll be right there when we land.
I guess when you're a kid and you lack a basic sense of security in your surroundings, computers can be pretty intimidating. Especially with these games crashing as often as they did, things can go wrong unexpectedly at any moment. So it's nice that they go this extra mile to make little kids feel comfortable every time they start the game. Computers are basically just one step removed from robots anyway, so they're kind of like inherently creepy.
Snug as a bugly. You're snuggled in my hands. No, I don't think I've seen this treehouse before. And since everyone I know already has a house, why, this one must be yours.
New resident?
Oh no, I know better than to trust woodland creatures trying to sell me houses. You animals and your dead entrapment schemes, you can't fool me. Rather than a storybook format, this one plays more like the Activity Center games. Only each activity is spelling related, and every time you clear one, Gopher shows up to reward you with some furnishings for your treehouse.
My rocker to patch this up. Let me get it back to your treehouse.
The goal is to clear all the activities so you can unlock all the pointless decorations, but the game doesn't really end. It's designed so that if you're bored enough, you can just keep exploring and replaying the games for all eternity. There are 3 areas of the map, each with 3 spelling-related activities to play. Much like the storybooks, there are hidden animations on each screen of the map for you to find, so as far as content goes, this is pretty robust for a game for toddlers. And the animation is surprisingly good. I've never really had a complaint about the quality of the animated storybooks, but this is miles ahead of even them. It's smoother and uses way more frames for each action. I guess since it didn't have to line up with the release of any particular film, they had more time to polish this one. To give you a sampling of the types of games available, on this first screen we have a quilt game with Tigger, where you have to pick the missing letter to fill in each 3-letter word, a game where you put Pooh's honey pots in alphabetical order, and a memory game with Piglet where you match the uppercase and lowercase letters on teacups. Pretty standard educational stuff. There are actually 3 difficulty settings on each game, but it's pretty hard to make a game about the alphabet actually difficult for anyone who's mastered that part of their life, so they don't really add much challenge. I do remember as a 4-year-old, I found this stuff hard though, especially the quilt game where you have to actually construct words. On the next screen, we have our next set of activities and fun things to click on.
This letter to Roo is from someone whose name starts with an O. O is for owl.
Tigger, I'm pretty sure you're not supposed to read the letters you deliver. I think that's like a federal offense. One of the big issues I have with this game is the excessive amount of dialogue the characters spout when you do pretty much anything.
Now we shall drop by to stop in and pop in on our good friend Rabbit.
It's pretty common for kids' games to have a lot of audio cues like this, where they congratulate you anytime things go well, but it can get really out of hand in some areas.
D. Oh, this spells dig.
Super marveloso fantastical and good.
Super what he said.
There's this one game in Rabbit's house where you have to paint every single letter of the alphabet on a sign, and all it is connecting the dots. Here, we have both Tigger and Rabbit stopping the game every 5 seconds to talk about how good you are at dragging your mouse in a vaguely letter-shaped pattern.
Not bad. Good.
And the whole thing ends up taking like 20 minutes just to complete this one activity. You can click while someone is talking to skip through their dialogue, but even with skips, just having to stop and wait for the game to load up the next line, drag out the next letter, and push it off the screen again takes freaking forever. Jesus Christ! The other 2 activities on this screen are kind of downers for some reason. We get this book from Eeyore that has all the pages torn out of it, like what else can go wrong in his freaking life? And then Brew's game is just that nobody has time for him, so he has to pretend he has friends.
It's a beautiful day for us to play, but my other friends aren't around. I have an idea. Let's pretend with these friends many sand I found.
There's not even a spelling game here. It's just Rue's miserable, lonely existence as the only child in this world of adult animals. Obviously, I'm way too old for this game, but even if you're within the recommended age range, it's still probably not the best teaching tool. There's no penalty for guessing wrong in any of these games, so even if you don't know the answer, just through trial and error you can progress through it anyway. In that way, it's not so much a game about learning to read, than it is a game about learning to screw the system.
Pooh and Roo were glad fellows when they roasted Rabbit.
Next up is the companion game, Ready for Math with Pooh, which is the same deal, just with numbers. It starts out the same way with a song about how you're safe in Pooh's hands, but this time, instead of the 100-acre wood, we've ended up in Stardew Valley.
Oh, hello. I'm Winnie the Pooh. I seem to have sat upon something that feels somewhat like a thistle. It must be Eeyore's. He won't be very happy about this. But he's not ever very happy about anything.
Wow! First you murder his plant, and then you make fun of his depression? That's cold, Pooh. So Pooh's plan to solve Eeyore's debilitating chemical imbalance is for you to go start a garden in this lot, earning stuff to plant in it by playing, you guessed it, math games. The games this time around are a lot more engaging, I guess just due to the nature of numbers being more abstract than letters. But even on the hardest difficulty, they're still not challenging to anyone outside the target age range. A lot of the mini-games are remixes of games found in the last one. For example, instead of putting honeypots in alphabetical order, we're putting jars of fruit in order by quantity. But there are some new ones too. There's this baking game where you count cupcakes by frosting them, and then sprinkle them with the corresponding shaker to the number of cupcakes. But on harder difficulties, Tigger comes and steals some, so you have to do some subtraction to find the new number shaker. For some reason, the hitboxes on these cupcakes are really weird, and it's kind of hard to click on them. But otherwise, I remember enjoying this game when I was first learning addition and subtraction and such. It was certainly a more fun way to practice than doing homework. Instead of 3 games per screen, on most screens we only get 2 this time. We do get a whole bunch more random objects to click on though.
Red, yellow, red, yellow, red, yellow, red, yellow.
My feet like the pattern the squirrel is playing, but my head doesn't know why.
The next game is a bug counting game with Roo and Tigger. Aw, look at that! Roo finally found someone who would play with him who isn't made of sand.
We're collecting some beautifully beastie-looking bugs for the garden. Right, Roo?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't bugs generally considered pests in a garden? Like, not something you'd want for healthy crops? The object of this game is just to sort the bugs by color. Then you pick whichever tray has the least bugs, and there you go. By far, though, my favorite activity in this game was Tigger's Treehouse, where you follow the blueprints to build contraptions for your garden.
Let's try and make some new things with this extra garden stuff.
I just love the idea of making cool inventions out of everyday household objects. I used to make stuff all the time as a kid just by taping random stuff together, so this was right up my alley.
That's one good grape squirter.
I like that you could clearly see every piece in the final product too. No matter how weird the assortment of objects was, even if you couldn't guess what purpose something had, once you saw the final result, it all made sense. Well, kinda anyway. So these games were pretty fun to me as a kid, but did they do a good job of teaching me reading and math? Well, I wouldn't say it really taught me anything, but it was a nice way to give me a bit more confidence when it came to these things. I was an ADHD kid, and I found learning in the classroom really difficult, so I felt pretty stupid a lot of the time. And these games gave me a chance to practice in a fun and judgment-free way. Even coming back to these games once I had learned to read and do basic math, just being able to clear them easily made me feel smart, and that wasn't something I felt a lot back then. As an adult, coming back to them was more boring than fun though. So if you have fond memories of these games, maybe it's best to just keep them as memories. Now it's time to do something for a slightly older crowd, Disney's Math Quest with Aladdin. This one is aimed at ages 6 to 9, so it'll be a nice change of pace to play something intended for more developed brains.
You look familiar, my friend. I need to review your papers.
Oh hi, not Robin Williams. The game starts with a greeting and a long introduction from Dan Castellaneta as the genie. I seriously can't tell if these are supposed to be impressions or if he's just doing a lot of random voices and accents.
You know, you have to pick a name, possibly an alias. It doesn't have to be your name.
They certainly have nothing to do with what he's talking about. He goes on for like 4 or 5 minutes explaining the interface, the different difficulty settings, the hint feature, introducing the characters, going off on tangents, reciting a list of US states and capitals, analyzing the Hays Code and its effect on American cinema. Oh, the game's starting. Unlike the other two, this game actually has a plot. The evil genie Bizarra is freed from her lamp by a random snake, and through some loophole in the genie rules, she becomes her own master.
After 10,000 years, I'm free! It's time to conquer Earth!
The hapless Aladdin and friends are just chilling in Agrabah when suddenly they're all kidnapped by Bizarra.
The old Bedouin's almanac didn't call for rain today. But there's a distant chance of lightning.
Then we're thrown into the palace dungeon with Genie and Iago and tasked with finding a way out. This is where we finally actually get to play. It works in almost a point-and-click adventure kind of way, where you navigate the pre-rendered 3D room by using the arrows on the edge of the screen to look for clues or useful items. But before you get too excited, these elements are pretty shallow. The pseudo 3D environments actually look pretty neat, and were somewhat impressive at the time. But the areas are just small enough that you don't ever really need to think about what to do next. Here, there are really only 2 screens to explore. The first one is just a blank wall, and rather than actually needing to figure out what to do here, the genie pops up and explains to us that this is a secret escape tunnel called Yazul's Number Wall.
Yazul's number wall.
But we need a chisel to reach it. And would you believe it, the only other screen in this area contains a chisel. But of course we can't just take the chisel, we have to play a math minigame for it.
Pardon me, Spider Lady, but we'd just like to grab that chisel. We promise not to disturb your web or any other access to the net.
Oh, 1997 jokes. So to get the chisel, we have to feed the spider babies by figuring out what type of bug they like. Even on the hardest difficulty, this game is just process of elimination, so it's pretty simple to figure out. Just work out a commonality in what type of bug they'll accept and bingo. With our digging tool in tow, it's time to go dig out that number wall the genie won't shut up about.
Yazul's number wall. Yazul's number wall. Yazul's number wall!
It's another minigame, this time with simple addition involved, where you click on the numbers that add up to other numbers to remove tiles from the wall. Again, the hardest difficulty just adds more numbers, so it shouldn't pose much of a challenge. I should have been more careful with what tiles I had available to make matches with. I guess now I have to unmatch some stuff so that I have more of the right numbers free for other matches. No. Still not right. Huh. Either this game is trickier than I initially thought, or I'm embarrassingly bad at math puzzles. The game goes on like this in a linear fashion. Once out into the marketplace, the next order of business is rescuing our friends from various vendors through a series of minigames. As the game goes on though, the tone veers off into some weird places. The movie Aladdin had kind of a mystical tone, and of course there was magic involved. Flying carpets, genies, talking birds, but it was sort of grounded in a reality where that sort of thing was still novel even for the characters in the universe. This game seems to take its cues more from the Aladdin TV show, where it just doesn't bother with verisimilitude, and pretty much anything goes, and everyone just rolls with it and doesn't question anything. Once we rescue Jasmine, she tips us off that Bizarra took Aladdin to the old wizard's lab.
I heard Bizarra say that she was going to take Aladdin to the old wizard's lab.
Which feels like kind of a weird thing to just casually mention like that. So we find our way to the wizard's lab and break our way inside. Again, rather than leaving it to us to figure out what we can and can't click on, the genie right away takes some triangles from the table and tells us they're important. First of all, how do you know that those triangles are important out of all the crazy shit in this room? And second of all, why not give me like 2 seconds to take in this new setting before you decide that I wouldn't notice them on my own if you didn't point them out to me? Anyway, Aladdin is apparently trapped in a dimensional vortex, so we gotta make potions with crystals to open it back up and rescue him.
The spirit of the ancient pharaoh, very uncommon.
Ha! So now we have wizards, pharaoh spirits, potions, magic crystals, and dimensional vortexes thrown into the mix, and it feels like they're straining my suspension of disbelief with how fast this got super weird. But anyway, all we have to do is solve a few easy word problems, and then it's down into the dimensional vortex to save Aladdin, which means solving a few mazes by working out how many spaces we are from the exit.
Hey! Something smells like feet.
Look, there's Al's shoe.
Aladdin doesn't wear shoes. Whose shoes are those?
Guys, help me! I can't break free from this vortex! Give me your hand!
Nah. With the Justice League reassembled, we can focus on the real threat at hand, the crazy evil genie. Aladdin reveals that she broke her lamp into 3 pieces, which makes her extra dangerous because she's harder to stop.
It's an 8.5 on the naughty scale.
So now we gotta go track down the missing pieces so we can lock her up for good. Fortunately, Bizarra was nice enough to not only leave one of the 3 with Aladdin, but also tell us where the next piece is hidden, at the magical carnival that changes locations every night. I think what I find the most frustrating about this game is that it's so close to actually being an adventure game, but every time they set up something like a puzzle or a problem to solve in the story, Genie railroads us and tells us exactly where to go and what to do, and this isn't affected by the difficulty. For instance, right when we got out of the palace dungeon, literally the first thing we saw was a stand with a camel. It even left us on that screen even though there was nothing to click on. So you think, this might be important. I'll have to remember that this is here. Now, Genie starts talking about how we need a map to get to the Magic Carnival. But before I even have time to think, gee, I wonder if it's at that camel stand, he goes,
But since we're geographically challenged, we need to visit Kemmel the Camel Man.
It's not like it's necessarily a bad game this way. It certainly contributes to a sense of progress without making the game too hard for little kids, but it just feels like such a tease. It's almost like this great adventure game, except it's actually just another animated storybook, and the story itself is pretty lazy. It introduces new elements on the fly, and characters have all this information about stuff they shouldn't. Like, if you're gonna make me sit through this story and not be allowed to participate in a meaningful way, you could at least put a little more effort into it, right? Give it some stakes. And if the genie has the answers to everything, why doesn't he just use magic to undo all of Bizarra's magic? He's a free genie. He can do whatever the he wants. I guess that's why when we finally do get to the carnival, it picks up a bit, because here, it's literally just an arcade of minigames that we can play without waiting through all this dumb story stuff. Basically, somehow, the lamp piece became a prize at this carnival with all these creepy mechanical people, so we have to play a ton of these games to earn enough tickets to buy it. Some of the games in this carnival are among the better in the game, too. For one thing, a couple of them you can actually lose. Like, take a look at this one game called Square Up. You take turns with the computer putting down marbles, and the first one to make a complete square wins. Sounds pretty simple, but because you can make a square of any size, it gets a lot harder to predict your opponent's moves. God, I don't know what it is about these Connect 4 type games, but I'm just garbage at them. The game Geonym isn't so bad either. You have to take turns filling in a shape with various pieces, and the person who puts down the last shape wins. You have to use strategy to make sure you fill in as much of the shape as you can on your turns so that fewer moves are left for the computer. Overall, a lot of the math puzzles in this game actually make me think, which is where the game really shines. There's not a ton of actual gameplay in this game, so it could have ended up pretty boring. But even as an adult, regardless of the actual difficulty of the puzzle, I still have to at least use some logic to figure it out. And the fact that more than one of them has actually stumped me up till now, either shows that this stuff at least somewhat holds up, or that I need to go back to grade school. There's not a ton of consistency though, as just as many of these puzzles are stupidly easy, to the point that they're barely even puzzles. Like there's this one where you have to stack up these columns so they all reach the same height, but there's literally no way to do it wrong, because as long as you don't make them all too tall on purpose, you'll never end up in a situation where you don't have the right pieces left to build the towers. Still, the ratio of good puzzles to bad puzzles is even enough that you never really know what the game will throw at you next.
It is I, the wizard pharaoh, very uncommon.
Ugh, it's you again. I guess the fun couldn't last forever. Now that we have all the tickets, we buy the dumb lamp piece, and then the pharaoh tells us to go get our fortune told while we're at it. So we might as well buy the token too. And in case you weren't sure what to do next, they make sure to tell you to go to the fortune teller no less than 20 times.
Seek the words of the fortune teller.
Hey, we could use a fortune. Maybe that'll tell us where the last lamp piece is. Can use this token to get a fortune from the fortune teller. Hey, the fortune teller. Could that be a clue?
Ah!
Seek a fortune and are worthy. Put a token in the slot below.
What's wrong with your mouth? Why does it hang open like that?
If unworthy, then no fortune, and off you go.
And what's with those slurping noises at the end of every sentence? So this terrifying thing tells us that Bizarra is after Aladdin because he's the biggest threat to her new reign of terror. Hang on, why? Aladdin is probably in this game less than any other character. It's the freaking genie she needs to be worried about. You know, the one doing the hard work of putting the lamp back together with his equally powerful magic. Iago is more of a threat to Bizarra than Aladdin. The camel guy. Literally anyone else in this game does more to actually stop Bizarra than Aladdin. But whatevs, it's off to Very Uncommon's pyramid to get the last lamp piece. By this point, the game has just given up trying to string together some kind of adventure narrative, and it just warps us there. No camel, no map, just poof, we're there, and we fly through the air to the entrance of the upside-down floating pyramid. So now, more than half an hour later, we finally find out what those triangles from the wizard's lab were for, which is to unlock this door, which the genie takes time to remind us, because how else would we remember that tiny detail from earlier among all the other useless and even incorrect information we've been given so far? Once inside, we find a long hallway with a split pathway. There are 4 puzzles total inside the pyramid, but you only really get to pick 2 to play because of the branching pathways in here. But don't worry, it's a false choice. There are actually only 2 puzzles anyway. A puzzle where you fill in a pattern, and one where you have to do some actual math. They just repeat. So if you don't realize that, you can end up picking the same puzzle twice, and not seeing the other one at all. The pattern one is pretty easy, but the other one actually takes some thinking about. You have to get the numbers in each of the trays to add up to the numbers above the lizard's heads.
Uh-oh. These guys look lean, mean, and green, and they work for scale.
Really? A joke about working for scale in an Aladdin game? Really? Anyway, what it boils down to is that we just have to move jewels around until we get the right number on each tray so that the sums of all 3 trays add up to 14, 9, and 11 all at once.
I am pleased. Now I am not pleased. Pleased.
Wait a minute. Okay, so 7 plus 7 is 14, and 7 plus 2 is 9. So then all I have to do is make the last one add up to 11 somehow. Wait, what the f***? Why is this so hard?
Now I am not pleased. I am pleased. Now I am not pleased. I am pleased.
It took me 23 minutes to solve this. And this is the freaking formula I had to use to figure this puzzle out. In a game for 9-year-olds, with visual aids. What is wrong with me? Now that I feel like an absolute moron, there's just one final puzzle where you have to cross a bridge by figuring out a pattern that changes in exactly 2 ways every time, and then they trap Bizarra back in her lamp and the game's over. Honestly, though I have some gripes about Math Quest, it's more ambitious than most of the other Disney interactive games I've played, and maybe for that reason I'm a little too hard on it. I have more to critique because it just has more substance. It feels like an actual game, so I hold it up to higher standards. It definitely hasn't aged well, but it was one of my favorites as a kid just because it was my first taste of anything resembling an adventure game. And I guess it's frustrating looking back on it, how many of those elements I enjoyed about it back then were just superficial. It's more replayable than the Winnie the Pooh games just for the logic puzzles alone, but whether or not you should revisit it has a lot more to do with whether or not you can stomach the genie's jokes, if you can call them that. He pretty much never shuts up, and every part of the game takes twice as long, just because they had to fit in as many lame attempts at humor as possible.
Brace yourselves! We're good inside in a big way!
The math portion half holds up though, so if anything, it was definitely a better teaching tool than its predecessors. Or maybe not if I'm what learning from this game produces. There are more of these Disney learning games out there, but we'll stop there for now. Entertainment games like these might not hold up for the sophisticated kids of today, but they certainly have their place in gaming history. Speaking of history, you may be wondering, if Disney Interactive was so successful, why aren't they still around today? Well, they are, just not as a publisher. Disney was never really comfortable being a games company. Even at the height of their success, they always got a little bit spooked whenever things seemed to be growing too fast or going too well. And with gaming, everything can change in a matter of a few short years. By 1998, the cost of developing games was climbing rapidly, and their new big game development division was costing the company a lot of money to run. Within a few short years, 25% of their staff was laid off, and with Katzenberg no longer at Disney, the higher-ups felt that it would be better to start licensing their games out again instead of developing them in-house. This, of course, wasn't all bad. It did eventually lead to the creation of one of the most popular series of games ever made, but it also made it harder for Disney to control the quality of games released bearing its name. Whenever a game did well, it'd be emboldened just enough to dip their toe back into publishing, but then they'd pull it right back out again whenever anything in the market would change. And so it's a bit of an endless cycle, waffling back and forth between publishing in-house and licensing to outside companies, and one that will probably continue until the end of time, or at least the end of Disney. Disney definitely approaches games differently than most companies, and that's part of why their output has been significantly better overall than most mass media entertainment conglomerates. But their reluctance to commit and lack of consistency has kept them from ever really being a major player in the gaming world. They seem to make great games when they work with companies instead of licensing out. It's just a shame they're too scared to ever really go for it.